Okay, look, if you're like me, then you already know that pop culture is not just entertainment or background noise. It is a force that shapes our perceptions of ourselves. It's a force that we should spend more time studying. Universities are starting to think so too. Today on the show, bringing pop culture into the classroom. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Listen, it's been a redacted number of years. No, it's been 12 years since I graduated from Queen's University. But I'm finding that the back-to-school excitement, it never really leaves. Mind you, this year, that feeling is a little bit bigger because I'm considering signing up for classes again, especially now that I can take a course in this.
Friends break up, friends get married, strangers get born, strangers get buried, trends change, rumors fly through new skies, but I'm right where you left me. Matches.
Now we go deep catalog over here. We go bonus tracks. That's what we do. This is Right Where You Left Me, Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is the subject of a new course at Ghent University in Belgium starting this fall. It is called Literature, Taylor's Version. The course will connect Taylor's songwriting to the work of Sylvia Plath, Charles Dickens, and Shakespeare. It is just the latest example of universities taking their focus around celebrity subjects and also just generally bringing pop culture into the classroom. That is something that we're going to talk about today, about the challenges of bringing pop culture into the classroom and also what are the benefits. British professor Elly McCausland is here. She created the course Literature, Taylor's Version. Dalton Higgins is here. He's been teaching a course at Toronto Metropolitan University about Drake and The Weeknd for the past 2 years. Elly, Dalton, welcome to the show.
Hello.
How's it going?
I'm excited. This is entirely my jam to talk about. Elly, I'm going to start with you. I want to start by talking about your development of the course, Literature, Taylor's Version. And I understand that this song had something to do with it.
All that bloodshed, crimson clover, sweet dream was over my hand, was the one you reached for, all throughout the Great War, always remember, tears on the letter I vow not to cry anymore, if we survived the Great War.
That is Taylor Swift, That's a Great War. Hey, how did this song inspire you to create the course?
All right. Well, also just want to say great choice of Right Where You Left Me as well to introduce this, because that is another song that I really, that I have thoughts about, and I wanted to talk about those thoughts. So, the Great War. So it happened, one autumn day when I was in my apartment stacking the dishwasher, glamorous as ever. And I was listening to the Great War. She just released Midnights, or at least the edition with the Great War.
The 3 a.m. edition, yes.
Indeed. So I was listening to it and I was thinking about the way that she uses the war, the kind of iconography of the First World War as a sort of metaphor for a kind of troubled relationship or the early stages of a relationship where everything's that, you're a bit anxious, you're not sure what's going on. And I felt kind of a bit weird about it. And I thought there's something strange about this choice. I kind of thought there's like a moral question here. Is it okay to sort of appropriate the suffering of First World War soldiers to articulate your own relationship issues?
Right.
And then I thought about the last time I had those feelings, which is when I read Sylvia Plath's poem, Daddy, which I used to teach to summer school students. And we would talk about this, so Plath uses the Holocaust as a metaphor for the pain she has regarding her troubled relationship with her father, who passed away when she was young. And so, I just wanted to talk about this. I started talking to my colleagues about it at lunch, those who would listen. But I wanted a kind of bigger platform to talk about this. And I also really wanted to hear what my students thought about it. And that's when I thought, let's bring this into the classroom and get a discussion going. Because my students are great. They're really smart. They'll have really interesting things to say. So let's broaden it out.
I'm so glad that you did that. Okay, so you also run a blog called Swiftritcher, which is not an easy word to say, I should say.
Easy to say.
It looks great, though. As a title of a blog, it looks fantastic. And you dig into a lot of these literary connections, and on there you write, I would suggest, this is a quote from you, I would suggest that this relationship with English literature gives Swift's work its extraordinary appeal. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it all comes down to what we call intertextuality. So the kind of mesh of where you have texts that refer to one another, not necessarily directly. So I would say Swift makes a lot of direct allusions to English literature in her work. I mean, you can find many articles on this, like BuzzFeed, 20 literature references in Taylor Swift you may have missed kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's direct references. She talks, for example, in This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things. She says, being all Gatsby for that whole year. She's obviously talking about The Great Gatsby, right? but not just the direct allusions. I think there's a sort of intertextual quality to her work where she is playing around with genre, she's playing around with metaphor, she's playing around with trope, with cliche, in a way that is intensely literary, in a way that writers have been doing for centuries. And I do think, I think it's the way in which she invokes this kind of complicated mesh of literature, both British and American, that gives it an appeal, even if you don't directly recognize the allusions or the techniques, because there's a sort of sense of this is drawing on something bigger. And I think, I suspect, that's my theory anyway, that is what makes her work so popular, the way it's kind of embedded itself within this cultural literary landscape.
I would just say my grander theory about Taylor's popularity has been that, like, she's also turned her life into a text in a very much the similar way, right? Like, she's playing a lot with allusions of just like similar stories that she's told before. They keep returning, sometimes in just like slightly shifted ways. And she, in that way, herself becomes or begs to be studied in that way, actually, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things we're going to talk about in the course is her self-fashioning, right? The way in which her work is very meta, in the way it's very self-conscious of her own status as author, as writer, as singer, and her reputation. The whole album reputation. And that, again, is very literary. The way in which, in English literature, we often look at the artist alongside the work and we try and make interconnections between the two in order to elucidate the work to a greater extent. And that's what a lot of Swifties are doing. Oh, I think this song is about Joe, or like, I think this song is about Calvin, she was doing this at the time. The kind of forensic detective work Swifties do is intense. And that is something that, literary scholars have been doing for a really long time as well. So I think that's absolutely part of it. And that's something I really want to go into deeper in the course as well.
Yeah, I've a long time felt that if Swifties could sort of dedicate the same energy that they take into decoding what Taylor's talking about into, like, I don't know, solving unsolved crimes, I think we would have a lot more sort of success rates in terms of solving those things. Dalton, I know that there's a bit of background noise where you are, but I just want to talk to you about the course that you teach at Toronto Metropolitan University. It's on Drake and The Weeknd. You're using a kind of similar model. You're using these big pop culture figures that everyone knows, but you use them as gateways into more complex ideas. But your focus is a bit different. What's your aim with your course?
Yeah, no, there are a lot of similarities to what Elly's doing as far as, when you think about, I'm teaching a course about Drake, and The Weeknd, and, rappers are just incredible writers, right? So my background just happens to be English literature as well. So when you talk about, Drake being a great writer, employing all of these literary devices that Elly mentioned, metaphors, similes, iambic pentameter, there's a lot of that going on. But what I would say is what we try to do in my course is to get students to move and think even beyond the music, right? And to start to think critically about their favorite musicians, right? So, when you go to college or university, critical thinking is so key. And I think it can be sometimes challenging for some students to look at their pop culture heroes critically. Yeah. I've been teaching this course now. I'm going to my third year teaching it, and sometimes I'll have some Drake super fans that believe, you know what I mean? They believe he can do no wrong. Yeah. But we're here to think, critically about his artistic output, as long as he is a person. So with my course, what I try to do is I try to get students, for example, to look at Drake through, it's very issues oriented. So we look at him, for example, through a racial and faith-based lens, right? Because Drake is, he's Black and he's Jewish. Yes. So what does this all mean? What are the implications? This Jewish rapper, this Black rapper from Toronto, right? Geography, globalization. And if you look at things, because it's sort of rooted in hip hop culture, there's this huge sort of hip hop education movement happening in the US. In Canada, it's still quite new, but in the US, going back 15, 20 years, courses are being offered in the U.S. tied to Jay-Z, tied to Outkast, a great duo out of Atlanta. Beyonce, if you're a Beyonce fan, there's so many courses. There are I think 5 courses in North America.
I think you can now get a degree in Beyonce. Like, there's enough courses that you can just simply major in Beyonce, perhaps. It's possible. Yeah. Yes.
No, precisely, right? Yeah. So again, for me, it's very issues oriented. So we talk about class issues. Drake happens to be, people position him as a sort of middle class rapper, in a hip hop community and society where we talk about its low income origins, dispossessed, marginalized communities. That's not Drake's narrative. That's not his journey. That was never his trajectory, right? So that's kind of what I try to do in my class.
So, Dalton, I got to ask you, like, there's something about Drake that it's either a praise of Drake or a criticism of Drake. This idea that he is someone who borrows so much from other cultures quite liberally and actually like makes no sort of does not make any sort of effort to hide that particular part of his career. But when it comes to that borrowing, a lot of people are like, listen, he's borrowing maybe a little too liberally from these things. And if maybe students show up to your class, they wouldn't necessarily be prepared to like engage with some of those ideas. The idea that you're not actually just, showing up to a class celebrating Drake. How do people respond to the fact that they show up to the class and actually you're engaging just as much with, these complex ideas, but also maybe perhaps criticizing the artists that they're talking about?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's one part of the genius and brilliance of Drake, I would say.
Yeah.
Whether it's this idea of, appropriation versus appreciation.
Yeah.
But why I think he's been able to sustain himself, both within the academy, we're teaching courses on him, people writing literature, essays, books on him, is his ability to stay tapped into, the zeitgeist,
Yeah.
So he's one of the few artists, if we're here somehow sitting here wondering why is he always debut number one on the Billboard 100, 200 charts, it's because he's able to sort of keep his finger on the pulse of humanity, of youth culture, of, Generation X. He's not a kid anymore. He's in his late 30s.
Yeah.
But I think that's what makes him this sort of unicorn-like figure and also opens him up to a lot of criticism from some students. I have some students that take the course, in fact, to try to, the course is called Deconstructing Drake in the Weekend.
Yeah.
And it's to essentially, attempt to tear him to shreds for not being, being, I have to, a staunch feminist, not supporting things tied to gender parity in the industry.
Yeah.
Within his own record label, OVO. A lot of students, they ask tough questions. There's like, how come it's only up until a couple months ago that you have signed, a female artist? It was sort of like a male-dominated sphere, his own camp, his own record label, right?
Yeah.
So you're taking the course to ask some tough questions, get some tough conversations we have.
So, Elly, when your course was announced, you've been featured in media all over the world. There's been a lot of criticism, a lot of people who were kind of critical of the idea that Taylor Swift sort of deserves all of this. Can you just talk a little bit about the response that you've received to announcing the course?
Yeah, I mean, I also just want to say, what Dalton said about critical thinking and kind of not being there to be a fan club. That's exactly what I want to do as well. I made it very clear even in the course description, like, this is not a Taylor Swift fan club. We are here to think critically about her as we would any other writer.
Yeah.
So the response, I mean, I've had some skepticism. There have been a few people who have sort of said, all she does is write about boys and breakups. And I'm kind of like, well, so that's half the literary canon.
That's
right?
all of literature.
Exactly. If you take heartbreak and love out of the equation, you're not left with much. The response, I'd say generally it's been really positive though. I've been overwhelmed by students, students mostly actually from outside Belgium who are asking if they can take the course online, people who have long finished studying who want to come back, which is great. And actually, I want to say the thing that's really touched my heart is I've had a lot of emails from female scholars, young female scholars who said, my professor said that this wasn't worth studying, but now, you've given me new inspiration that it is. And actually my professors changed their mind. And I find that great, because that's what I've set out to do is kind of like Dalton was saying, I want to make us sort of rethink the way we see popular culture. It is worthy of study. It is something that we can think critically about. In fact, I would say we should think critically about it, because this is the world we live in. We need to understand the zeitgeist. We need to understand what is popular.
Yeah.
I've had a few, opinions, expressed that weren't so favorable. But to be honest, I mean, I don't read the comments because that way madness lies.
Yeah, of course.
The direct hate mail I've had wasn't particularly well expressed. I would say this person might have, these people might benefit from taking the course themselves. But those that have expressed negative opinions, a lot of it seems to be rooted in misogyny. A lot of it seems to be rooted in a kind of hatred of Taylor Swift and what she stands for. And to be honest, I find it fascinating. It's going to be material for our first seminar. We're going to unpack the response because actually looking at this is part of the course, right? Why Taylor Swift attracts this kind of intense reaction. Yeah. So we're going to link that to some of the themes discussed in the course. So it's all coming really nicely together. And I'm generally really thrilled by how people have responded to it. Surprised, very surprised, but delighted.
Well, Elly, we've got about a minute left, but let me just ask you this. If a university introduced a course about Bob Dylan or the Beatles, like no one would bat an eye. Those courses have existed at this point for decades. But a Taylor Swift course still raises those eyebrows. What does that tell you about who we canonize in culture?
I think it tells you that feminism has a lot more work to do. We have a long way to go. I think, I mean, I could talk for a lot longer than a minute on this, but I suspect, I kind of want to unpack that in the course, as I said, because I suspect some of it is rooted in misogyny. I think some of it is also rooted, though, in a fear of the new. Because, yeah, obviously the Beatles and Bob Dylan are not new these days. And actually, you know, I want to link this in the course to the novel. The novel, as its name suggests, you know, was a new format in the 18th century, and it raised a lot of eyebrows when it first came out. There were a lot of people who sort of saw this as the downfall of culture. You know, everything's going to the dogs, and we've always been skeptical about what is new and what is popular. And that's actually, I think, the reason we should look at it. We should look at why we're skeptical. Why are we so afraid of the new? Why are we so afraid of something that is a worldwide global sensation? Because I think there's a lot of this, whether it's Taylor, whether it's, it could be, you could say this about, you know, video game courses or, you know, media studies, that sort of thing. There's always a kind of snobbery there about what is new. And that's something I'm hoping to change.
I wish I could keep talking to both of you at this for just genuinely a long time. I'm going to sneakily get into both of your classes because they both sound so fascinating. But in the meantime, Elly, Dalton, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Of course. Professor Elly McCausland is teaching a literature course about Taylor Swift this fall at Ghent University in Belgium. Dalton Higgins' course on Drake and the Weeknd will be offered at Toronto Metropolitan University for the winter semester. They're both speaking about the value and the challenges of using pop culture in education. Hi, friend. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. You are listening to Commotion. Listen, I always think that I'm going to get so much reading done over the summer. And now that it's somehow the last week of August, I'm starting to think, man, past me is so optimistic about the potential and the possibilities and the limitlessness of summer, but that is not the reality. But you know what? Jael Richardson, who's one of our regulars here on Commotion, has a tip for people like me who want to read, but then never actually end up doing it. It wouldn't surprise me if you already know some folks who have converted to basically being audiobook only. Audiobooks are the fastest growing book format, and with about $2.4 billion in sales just over the last year alone. Today we're going to talk about this. Listen, if you think listening to a book doesn't count as reading, Jael has some words for you. Jael, welcome to the show, dude. How's it going? So nice to see you.
So lovely to see you. So lovely to talk about books.
It's my favorite time. It's my favorite time forever. Listen, you feel so strongly that listening to audiobook is the same thing as reading. Tell me about that. Why do you feel that way?
Okay, so I feel this is like my obsession. When people tell me that listening to audiobooks is not listening or is not reading books, I lose it. Because first of all, I mean, it's not very, it's pretty ableist to say that like you have to read a physical book in order to read it. There's lots of reasons why some people can only consume audiobooks, whether that's from like a temporary disability with something like a concussion that might come and go, or depression that might make it easier or harder at certain times to listen versus to read from the page. There are others who are blind, who listening to audiobooks is the only way to consume books. So I think it's super ableist. I also think it's really narrow-minded because audiobooks can help unlock readers in different ways. I remember, you know, my son's not a great reader, especially of long chapter books, loves magazine articles and things like that. Yeah. But one of the things a teacher recommended was to listen to audiobooks, and especially to listen to audiobooks while you're looking at the text so that it actually improves your your reading comprehension skills. And so there's lots of ways in which audiobooks support all kinds of learners and readers.
Generally speaking, like I learn so much better when I'm listening to something than I do when I talk, than when I do when I read it. That's partly why I do this for a living. You know, one of my earliest memories of falling in love with a book was not reading Lord of the Flies, but listening to my grade 8 teacher, shout out Miss Ormiston, you know, having us all put our heads down on the desk and closing our eyes, and she read the book and I was like, this book is great. But when I'm spending time reading it, it's a bit of a challenge. Why do you love audiobooks yourself as a sort of audiobook consumer?
Well, one of the reasons that it's so enjoyable to listen to someone else read is because it takes some of the work, some of the like labor of like formulating the sounds and text. And especially like all kinds of people, that's a better way of processing information. Yeah. What I love about it is that I have to read so many books for work, so many books. And I'm actually a very slow page reader. Like reading a book that's a paper book, I enjoy every minute of it, but it just takes me a long time. So audiobooks allow me to read more books, and especially because I can listen to them anytime, anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I hate cooking. I hate cleaning my house. But when I put on like a good audiobook, like it really does make the time go a lot faster. A long drive. I love listening to a good audiobook on a long drive. I love knowing that an hour-long drive means like I'm going to be like a new percentage through this next audiobook. Yeah. So that's what I love. Yeah.
I am married to a librarian who is like the number one advocate of audiobooks. And one of the biggest things that we talk about is like, hey, we got to do this thing. Like, let's say clean out the basement. She's like, oh, that's like 2 audiobooks worth. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I don't measure my life in audiobooks. But she's like at that point where she's like, you know, so oriented around audiobooks that it's just kind of become exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I love to do the things that I hate to do now because I get to listen to a book while doing them. Listen, I heard you put audiobooks into 3 categories. What are those categories?
So I have 3 categories for people who are sort of thinking like, I don't know if I can do this. So it's important to recognize that audiobooks for me, the 3 categories are value added, value maintained, value lost. Okay. So value added books are books that I love. As audiobooks, they actually improve the experience. So oftentimes those are ones that I'm reading a different culture. And so you're actually hearing the narrator read in a different language or pronounce words with the right dialect and sound. I love those. Sometimes there's like music or singing or like little pieces that are added to the production of the book that add value. Yeah. Value maintained are typically books like thrillers and romance novels, which are so well written and clean in their writing that you can go back and forth between paper and audiobook and there's no difference. It's not easier. It's not better. It's just the same. It's like really clean and smooth. And then value lost are books where people did not think about the audiobook and they were really writing it for page readers. Yeah. I just finished an amazing novel, but as an audiobook, there were footnotes. And for like the first 3 chapters, I was like, why is the voice changing? What is happening here? Who's talking? What's going on? And so those are the ones you want to avoid, honestly, especially if you're new to audiobooks. I've listened to so many that I have processes that I can get through that. But if you're new to audiobooks, you want to look for ones that are sort of value added or value maintained.
Okay, we got like a minute and a half left. So we're trying to cram a lot into this last little bit. But let me just ask you this. What are some books where you feel it's better experience to listen rather than to read?
Okay, so Prince Harry's Spare, for sure. Loved it as an audiobook.
As an audiobook. Wow, yeah, okay.
And I think it's he sings a bit, he laughs a bit. There's some fun stuff. A new book that's out is called The African Samurai by Craig Shreve. Really great first-person narrative, 16th century Japan about the first like African samurai. Really great audiobook listen because you get into the character's voice and because it's first person. Best audiobook, very quickly, Homegoing by Jesse. It's an older book, but if you're new to audiobooks, it covers 100 years and each chapter is a different character. And so value added, you get different accents and voices as you progress through the story and into different chapters. And I recommend reading a chapter per journey. So listen to a chapter on a trip. If it's a 20-minute chapter, listen to it on a 20-minute trip or a 20-minute walk, and you get complete stories. So you don't lose sight of the big plot because it's almost like multiple small plots smashed together.
I love that you're like, this is how you read this book, because like everything that I've ever encountered about you, Jael, is like I don't care how people read. I just want them reading. And I just love that mission. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to get to that book. I'm going to do it because I am new to audiobooks. So your suggestions are going to guide me through. Thanks for being here, friend.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Jael Richardson is an author. Her books include Gutter Child and The Hockey Jersey. She's also the executive director of Fold, the Festival of Literary Diversity. And that is it for the show today. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Hey, before I go, I just want to say thanks to my pals Emil Niazi and Talia Schlanger for filling in for the past couple of weeks on Commotion. Remember, you can listen to any episode of the show whenever you'd like. Our episodes are on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, or you know what? Watch the episodes on YouTube because it's great to watch it there. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Listen, I'm going to see you tomorrow.